I'd like to welcome you to this is our last community conversation, and my name is Kathleen, and I'm the city planner with the City of Shoreview, and I am working on the comprehensive plan, which is why we're all here tonight, to talk about resilient, responsive, and ready, and how we can be ready for the anticipated changes with our climate in the future. So tonight, just to review our evening, first, we're going to have a series of presentations. I'm going to start off with just a short presentation with respect to what resiliency is and what we're doing here in the City of Shoreview. Then I am going to hand it over to the Freshwater Society, who will talk about Resilience 101. The Great Plains Institute is here as well to talk about their Golden Valley project, and then we have a representative from the MPCA who works with the Green Step Cities program, and they will present information on how to increase resiliency operations. That will be followed by a question and answer period, and then we'll also have interactive activity. If you've noticed at your tables, there's some little card with some, I think, information and questions, and we'll have some group discussions and we'll play off of that. We will adjourn, I'm pretty sure by 8:30 p.m. So with that, I'm going to start. So I think one of the questions that I've been asked by a number of people, I've also asked myself, what is resiliency? This is a word that has, I think, recently come up with our comprehensive planning efforts. If you were involved in our comprehensive plan revision back in 2008, you didn't hear this term. The term back then was sustainability. And I think the term before that in 2000 was stewardship. So they're all probably kind of related, but they're all a little different. So I thought, well, what is resiliency? So I'm going to look it up because I'm not the expert here. Actually, these ladies are the experts. So looking at the dictionary, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. Okay, so I think we can all understand that. So how do we recover from, say, a storm event or maybe a health emergency or something like that? Well, then how do you apply that to a community such as Shoreview? And this comes from, I think, a variety of sources. A resilient community has the strength to withstand and respond to an ever-changing climate. I actually changed that a little bit. Because when we think about climate, what are we thinking about? Is it just the weather? Is it our natural resources? Is it the social climate, cultural or economic climate, or health? And I think resiliency really addresses all of those. We can certainly have challenges, say with our health, if we have health epidemics within a community. How do we address and respond to that? Lately, you've probably, if you've watched the news, heard about some of the social challenges that we have been going through, not only in the Twin Cities, but throughout the nation. So resiliency really applies, I think, throughout these topics and probably many more. And our comprehensive plan actually crosses and addresses all of these topics. Tonight, we are going to focus on climate change and our natural resources. And one thing to keep in mind, and I think we'll go into a little bit further, is you might not think that climate change can affect the social fabric of our community, but it can. There are certain populations that may be more vulnerable to climate change than others. So with that, as part of our comprehensive planning process, we are looking at ways we can integrate resiliency into our comprehensive plan. And so these are just some suggestions. So when we take a look at land use planning, it is, Shoreview is a typical suburban community. We have, I think our land use, our housing density is around 3 units per acre. Typical suburb. Auto-oriented, dependent. So what can we be doing to really reduce auto dependency, reduce our emissions? And one is taking a look at compact development patterns. So smaller lot development, higher density development, and trying to reduce dependency on automobiles, increase population to support transit. Another thing that we will be addressing in the comprehensive plan is energy and water use. and essentially taking a look at measures that reduce consumption. For our public infrastructure is stormwater management, how we are going to be managing some of these storm events that we've seen more frequently that we have in the past, and how we prevent flooding. And then natural resources, taking a look at vegetation and pest management and being resistant to diseases. So I just wanted to highlight some of the current practices that we are doing in the community. Again, our plan is looking out to the year 2040. We are doing a lot right now, but there's a lot more we need to learn and enact in the future. Regarding land use development, if you have driven around Shoreview, specifically along the 694 corridor, you've probably seen some newer buildings go up. And there is a trend towards higher density and more compact development. And that's not necessarily, I don't think the overall goal was related to climate change and reducing that carbon footprint for those developments, but that's certainly one of the benefited byproducts of this higher density development that we are seeing. For energy and water use, we do engage in a program called Water Smart, and that is essentially a software platform that monitors water consumption. So if you are a resident, you can compare your water usage to the average Shoreview resident's water usage. Also, our Public Works Maintenance Building, which is across the street, is a LEED Gold certified building. And there's a number of sustainable practices that have been put in place with respect to that building, and one is the reuse of stormwater for that building. And then also with natural resources, some of you probably have heard that we do have the Emerald Ash Borer here, and we do have a management program which allows residents to treat their trees with a chemical injection, and we also do that in our public parks. So those are just a few of the things that we are doing. I'm going to actually go back to that one. So that's really my presentation, but I did want to introduce our staff that is here tonight. So as I call your name, please stand up. Nikki Hill, she is our Economic Development and Planning Associate. Aaron Sade, he is our Associate Planner. And then Ellen Brenna is our Natural Resources Specialist. So let's see if I can do that. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. And if you take a look on your agenda, if you go to the back page, is their bios. I'm not going to read those just because it would be too long and I'm not the best reader. So we have Leslie Yetka. She is the Director of Programs with the Freshwater Society. And we also have Jen Cater from the Freshwater Society as well. And she is a Program Manager. Abby Finnis is a Senior Planner with the Sustainability Green Plains Institute. And then Laura Milberg is a Principal Planner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So with that, I am going to hand it over to, I think it's Abby. Oh, sorry.
I'm doing it over in 2 seconds. All right. Good evening. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me? So I am Leslie Yetka with the Freshwater Society, and just a little bit of a background. Freshwater Society is a nonprofit that works throughout the state in working with communities in water issues, not only protecting our surface waters, but also our groundwater systems. And we also facilitate a lot of planning around a variety of issues, in this case, climate resilience. And so I will be giving a little bit of a background on climate and resilience, and then I think you'll hear from Abby and from Laura, and then Jen Cater will actually be leading you in a facilitated exercise where we're going to actually hear from you about reflecting about a lot of the things that we're talking about and generating good information for the City of Shoreview. So you can thank us for all of the sheets of paper on your tables. But just to start, you're here focusing on resilience, and what is this kind of concept, and what does it mean to you as well as to your community? And this is a picture I've been using lately because it's actually a place down in the Florida Keys. This is a condominium unit that's on the ground floor right on the ocean that my sister and I inherited a couple of years ago from my parents, who are actually both passed away, but we've been going down here since we were children. And so as you can see, there is extensive destruction here from Hurricane Irma. We had a 9-foot storm surge, we had 12-foot waves, and it pretty much wiped out. Pardon?
Did you say 9 feet?
9-foot storm surge on the island. That's only about 7 feet high above sea level, with 12-foot waves on top of that. So 160-mile-an-hour winds they topped out at. And so as you can see, extensive damage. So for us, this is a very personal experience with a hazard that has happened in a real natural disaster in my life. But the reason I'm showing you this is because it really, to me, highlights this idea of resilience and planning for the future, and how do we make decisions that can help place us in a better position than what you see here. Because this is a condominium association, we have 32 owners, and right now we're struggling with this conversation about what do we do? What are our next steps? Some on the association want to fix this and fix it like it was. It's a 1950s building, so it's not built up to code. And the difference in damage to our units compared to units right next to us who were built to code is dramatic. But others on the association want to tear it down and rebuild, and actually build to code, which means putting the building up on stilts, because that means it's out of the floodplain so the water can go through. But we're struggling with this conversation, and that is, to me, in essence, resilience planning. What do we do in the future to make sure this, or at least we can minimize the risk of this happening again? And it's a hard conversation to have, and there's a lot of trade-offs. And so this is a very hyper-local example of resilience planning, which you're going to have a chance to talk more about as we finish the presentations. But I just want you to use that as a kind of a benchmark when you are thinking about what can the community do to help reduce future impacts happening. Now, of course, we don't have hurricanes here, thankfully. We don't have storm surges. We don't have sea level rise. But we do have changes in our climate. And so this is to give you some background on Minnesota's changing climate. This is information from Kenny Blumenfeld, who's a state climatologist with the Minnesota DNR. And in general, I didn't want to put up numbers or charts and graphs here, but in general, Minnesota is getting warmer and it's getting wetter. We are having more intense rainstorms, which I'm sure you all have experience with and have seen evidence of, not only here, but in other parts of our state. That's becoming more the norm now. These 100-year large events are becoming more, are happening more frequently, and the rain is coming down, it's more intense. And so that's documented, and that's expected to continue. Also, our cold weather is actually warming up. So we are losing those really cold days. We are losing temperatures that are cold enough to keep, ice cover on our ponds. And so that has an impact on our ecosystems, on our lakes, on the vegetation. Our growing season is actually getting longer. So that has a big impact on trees and other plant communities that we have. Hot weather is not yet increasing, but all of the trends indicate it will. So those really high, intense days of like over 90-degree heat that we have, we're expected to have more of them. But right now, the evidence isn't showing that that's happening right now. Not that we should plan for that. But likewise, drought, our drought periods, we have them. They're not increasing significantly yet, but they're expected to continue. And then these severe storms, tornadoes, hail, damaging winds, Right now, we're not having more prevalent types of weather like that, but that is expected to increase in the future. So this is all sort of a summary of the climatologist distillation of what we're experiencing right now and what we can expect to have more of in the future. So when you think of resilience planning, it's really adapting for future conditions. And so I wanted to go back to this slide that I skipped originally. You know, there's some things that we can't control right now in a local setting, in your community. So when I say hazards and exposure, I mean climate-related changes. And you know, you can't control the 10-inch rain that falls within a 24-hour period. But there are things that a community can address. And so features of a community, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be your plant communities, whether it be your water resources, your lakes and your streams, those are all features of your community. And things can be done to make sure that in future, when we have these impacts related to climate, that the impact is less severe, if that makes sense. So it really gets down to a response. What does the community want to do when we have more intense rains, when we have warming winters and changes happening from that? What is it that the community wants? So in thinking about planning, and this is going to lead into your exercises when we take you through that in a little bit, but there's really three kind of frames of mind to keep in mind. One is identifying what are our hazards of concern. And so I gave you what's really been significant here in Minnesota. And again, you don't see hurricanes on there, and you don't see storm surges, but we have our own climate hazards here of concern. So what are those hazards of concern for Shoreview? What are you most concerned about? And then it's really about determining vulnerabilities and strengths. What is it about the community that's vulnerable to large storm events? What strengths does the community have in place that you want to protect or enhance to maintain your resilience to those impacts? And then prioritizing community actions, and that's where your comprehensive plan really comes into place. What is it we want to focus on, and what is it we want to focus on now? What is of most concern to our community? So hopefully that gives you some framework and background for what you're going to be talking about the rest of the evening when we get into our small group conversations. Before I leave, there's something I want you to do right now. So I've given you a little bit of background, you're going to hear more, but related to changes in the community and impacts, and it could be, you know, I haven't been able to, my kids haven't been able to skate on a local pond for the past 3 years. I haven't been able to go cross-country skiing very much at all for the last 5 years. If you could just spend some time, and actually on your tables, and if you're at a table where you don't have any paper, if I could ask you to move to a table where there is paper, you'll see that there's half sheets of paper and pens. If you could just spend a few minutes writing some responses to this. What is it you're noticing now? What are you most concerned about in the future? Okay, you can feel free to keep writing. We're not going to report out on this yet, but I just want you to hold on to that, and we will go into the next presenter, which is Abby Finness.
Hi everybody. My name is Abby Finness, and I was invited to come and give you a little bit of an example of what the City of Golden Valley has been doing around this topic of resilience and sustainability in the context of their comprehensive plan. So I worked with the Golden Valley over the past year to develop a resilience and sustainability plan for the city that they will use to draw from to include goals and policies and strategies in their comprehensive plan update. So I'm going to go through that, and then I'm really kind of going to focus on a lens of energy and how you can think about climate mitigation as a resilience strategy as well.
So I work for an organization, a nonprofit organization called the Great Plains Institute. We are located in South Minneapolis, and we have folks across the country. We're about 30 person staff, and we work on kind of everything that's included in the energy system, from generation to transmission to all the way down to consumption and at the local level. And so I'm part of our sustainable communities teams, and I work with local governments on energy, on climate, resilience, sustainability, all of those kinds of things wrapped up, and supporting cities in their efforts. So through that work, I worked with Golden Valley on its resilience plan, and that included completing this vulnerability assessment. So looking at these different areas and identifying, just as Leslie said, what are your strengths and what are your vulnerabilities when you're exposed to these different hazards. So this framework here it comes from the Met Council. The Met Council is really the governing body that drives the comprehensive plans in the metro area, and they put together a local planning handbook that is chock full of resources in all of the different areas of the comprehensive plan. And this year, resilience is new. It's not been in any plan before, and it's encouraged by the Met Council for cities to include this in their comprehensive plan update. And so they've broken it down into these kind of 4 areas of thinking about your natural infrastructure, your built infrastructure, so thinking about trees versus roads and how do they interact, and then who's vulnerable in your community, and what are they vulnerable to, and then what are some economic vulnerabilities as well. And then kind of the final thing is thinking about climate mitigation. If we do all of this work to adapt to climate change, but we're not doing anything to solve the problem of climate change, then we're not helping ourselves, right? The problem's only going to get worse, and we're just going to keep chasing it. So we need to think about stemming what the source of the problem is in the first place. And so I'm going to talk first about these 4 areas briefly, and then get into what is available for folks around climate mitigation. So natural infrastructure, thinking about the trees in your community, what kind of grasses you have, what kind of pervious surface you have, parks, different lakes, and those are not, yeah. Anyway, so those kinds of things, and think about how they fit in your community right now, how do they function, how can they function better, and so we did a quick assessment on some of these areas to look at how Golden Valley is doing. And we kind of did this assessment for each of those 4 areas that are called out by the framework. So infrastructure, you are probably facing a very similar state of infrastructure right now. It's old, and it's not built to future projections of rain or other kind of freeze-thaw cycles that we're going to start seeing more of in the future. And so how can we think about building some of that in a way that accommodates future weather patterns? And that might mean reducing the amount of pavement and increasing the amount of pervious surface so that rainwater is captured instead of conveyed, or increasing the size of the conveyance, or a combination of those kinds of things. And so just better understanding how infrastructure, both green and gray, so the hard stuff and the vegetation interact with each other, so that cities can plan for and accommodate increased rainfall. Extreme heat is also going to be an issue, and that affects people. So who's vulnerable in your community? Residents over 65, young kids are often vulnerable, folks with respiratory issues like asthma or allergies are all kind of vulnerable folks that you want to be aware of who's in your community and how can you help them, and what spaces are available. And then kind of similarly, economic vulnerability. What sorts of risks are we looking at in terms of economic? And you can kind of think, different shocks like the Great Recession that we just came out of a few years ago, or kind of normal stresses like I have up here heating assistance, fuel poverty. There are folks who spend a disproportionate amount of their income on paying for heating, paying for electricity for air conditioning on hot days. And so how can we think about making things more affordable and in a way that we're also not increasing our greenhouse gas emissions by using more of this energy. So just kind of thinking through all of those connections and addressing these vulnerabilities and trying to strengthen the community on all 4 of these levels is really kind of what we're aiming toward. So climate mitigation, energy, understanding how you're using electricity, natural gas, transportation fuels in your community and how those can be used more efficiently and with cleaner fuels are really kind of the key to mitigating our impact on climate change. So what I have up here are, understanding the number of customers in Golden Valley. There's a lot of residential customers in Golden Valley, but the big users are the industrial consumers. And so you can see a graph up here that says there's over 8,000 residential customers and 146 industrial customers. But 62% of the energy is used by the industrial customers. And so if you start wanting to make goals and strategies around reducing energy consumption in your community, you're probably going to want to target some of those bigger operators in your community and work with them to think about different strategies to reduce energy consumption. We have really cool tools available to us now. A few years ago, the University of Minnesota mapped the entire state using LiDAR data, which is where a plane flies over the state and sends down little laser beams and identifies where different areas are shaded. And they use this to then identify your solar resource. So you can do this on rooftops, you can do it on ground, you can basically do it anywhere where those planes flew. And you get a good sense of how much solar you have available in your community. One of the things that has changed, I'll go back to that one. But one of the things that has changed in the Met Council's requirement around solar is that they have developed these maps for the community and they've calculated the solar resource in your community. And so rather than just having kind of this passive policy statement and comprehensive plans that didn't really mean anything since 1976, cities can actually have real tangible goals around solar because it's now much more affordable. It's easier for folks to access, whether it's on your own rooftop or you want to participate in a community solar garden or if you want to participate in any program offered by your electricity company. There are a lot of ways that you can think about solar now that you weren't able to before. So they've included these additional requirements in the plan that you have to have a map and you have to have this solar calculation and goals around solar in your community. So this is what the map looks like for the city of Golden Valley. The yellow areas are where there's a better solar resource. So you can start thinking about, well, we don't want solar on our baseball fields because kids play there, but maybe this kind of ditch on the side of the road would be a good place, or parking lots. You could have a little canopies with solar on it, and just start thinking about where you want solar, where you don't want solar, and addressing it that way by using these maps. Here is the solar resource calculation that the Met Council provides for cities, so it gives you your total gross solar calculation, which is an unrealistic number because you're not going to cover every square inch of the city in solar panels. But then they start breaking it down by, well, okay, let's look at all the rooftops in your community. How much solar can you get from there? But these are still kind of abstract numbers. What does this mean? How much solar is that? Oops. Buttons. So we developed this solar calculator that allows you to enter all of the electricity that is used in your community, and then enter your solar resource that is given to you by Met Council, and then you can kind of see that chart over there. And it lets you compare the solar resource to the electricity that you use in your community. And you can start saying, well, we can reasonably get 10% of our electricity from solar within our community. And so you can start setting more realistic goals around that. So I'm a little bit jumping around here, but I want to transition kind of, this is an example of one of the goals that Golden Valley came up with in their resilience plan. This one is around developing clean energy, and you can just sort of see how it flows from that to get into policy and then their objectives and their implementation. And so all comprehensive plans are kind of made up of that existing conditions piece, and then your goals, the desired conditions, and then how are you going to do that with your strategies. And so we walked through this for each of the different resilience areas and came up with a number of goals and strategies to do that. And so this is the energy goal. We also have tools that are available through another program to help cities kind of walk through that program or walk through those steps and thinking about how energy is consumed within your community. As I mentioned before, this is just kind of another breakdown, and it's just really helpful to see where all that energy is being used so that you can really make those goals and identify the strategies to achieve them. We have a lot of resources on what all of these clean energy resources are and how you can find it and how you can measure that as well. And then kind of more broadly goals that are available to communities as well to get you to start thinking about what you want for your own community. And finally, these strategies, the city has tools available to them that they end up using and implementing in their comprehensive plans. And they go from kind of the easier stuff by encouraging folks to do things and incentivizing people to do things to more kind of regulatory things and telling people that they need to do things. So an example of an encouragement is that the city could put, sign up for a wind source, which is Xcel Energy's green energy program, on their website. Incentives can be, rebates and things like that, so that you can improve the efficiency of your home. And then you can get into regulation through ordinances and different zoning changes. And then the city can lead by example. They can put solar on the rooftop of city buildings and take other kind of demonstrative action. So sorry, that was a little bit of jumping around there, but just wanted to give you a sense of the tools that are available and sort of the place that folks are at and thinking about how to think about energy in a different way that we haven't really thought of before, because it is really important and there are a lot of benefits I think that can be gained economically and environmentally in rethinking how we use energy in our communities. 13 minutes. Cool.
So, my name's Laura Milberg. Happy to be here tonight. I'm very involved with the Green Step Cities program, which Shoreview is a member of the Green Step Cities program. And how many of you know what that is? A few people, so that's good. So it's a challenge and recognition program that's run by Pollution Control Agency and other partners, including Great Plains Institute and many others, to get cities to become more sustainable and have sustainability be the norm for the city. And so the city can then follow the best practices that are part of the Green Step Cities program and post actions that they've done which meet those best practices and share between other cities and compete with each other to advance up the steps by adopting more and more best practices. And so Shoreview is doing very well in that area, and I'm a best practice advisor for the Green Step Cities program in the areas of buildings and resilience, which is kind of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, which is city operations and how the city can be more resilient in what it's doing. A lot of great ideas are already included in the draft resiliency chapter, and maybe a few more will come up tonight. So I want to explain the Green Step Cities program had 28 best practices, and each had a number of actions under them for a sustainable community. And in 2016, we added the first new best practice, which was best practice 29, specifically for resiliency, climate resilience. And climate resilience overlaps with many sustainability best practices, but there are also a few things, kind of a sliver of things that weren't covered in the Green Step Cities program before that time that are very focused on adapting to climate change. And so that's what's included in best practice 29. And I'll show you a few of those things that relate specifically to city operations. So first, just to kind of reiterate what's been covered so far, and maybe to add a little to that, the climate risks that are faced by Shoreview. So we have warming, nighttime and winter low temperatures already that are affecting all sorts of things, everything from trees, surviving, maple trees that like really hard, cold winters, and the kinds of insects that are around that, say, are affecting ash trees, which are able to survive now because the winter temperatures aren't so low. We're having heavier precipitation events, as you know. Wildfire smoke is actually impacting us more severely. It's not here that we're having wildfires, but they are in Canada and out west, and we are getting the plumes from those, and it's affecting our air quality at times, depending on the weather patterns. So that will become more and more of an issue as air pollution worsens because of climate change. And then we have the potential for extended heat waves with high humidity. As was mentioned earlier, we're not really experiencing more than we normally do in our variable climate, but we're expected to much more by mid-century. And of course, the urban heat island effect makes all these things worse. It exacerbates all of it, and I'll get into that more. One of the best practice 29 actions to take is to improve local energy resiliency. And there are many ways to do this, distributed renewable systems, microgrids, some of the ideas to also minimize the fuel poverty that might be experienced by some members of the population, especially using solar as a resource for them to lower costs. This is a picture of the Wright Hennepin solar garden, which was the first solar garden in the state, and it shows what just a small community can do with a solar garden. They have 25 subscribers from their community. So it's possible to make them really big, it's possible to make them smaller, but they can be a resource for a community. And solar really helps address so many issues. It helps with mitigation and with adaptation. So the implications of the climate risks that we face for Shoreview, the warmer temps and wildfire smoke, increasing air pollution, are going to get more and more serious because warmer temperatures increase ozone, they increase pollens, they cause the heat and the drought in other parts of the country, with wildfire smoke or increasing pollution. And so really to do things at the local level that we can to control that pollution is really to try and not contribute any more pollution than is already being generated. And so some of the ways that we can do that are to retrofit our public works trucks with diesel or buy new ones, that are electric, or even fuel cell for really heavy duty trucks. Fleet vehicles to deal with those and convert them to higher mileage, or EVs, to invest in solar plus storage as backup, and also as can be used to also level out loads and reduce peak loads. It's an opportunity if you have any diesel generators to replace those, or even with natural gas, it's a more sustainable resource that can be there even when fuel supplies get interrupted. And then for all these things that the city can do itself, and these are just a few suggestions, to provide incentives for business owners and residents to do the same, to invest in solar and storage, to buy EVs, to use transit more frequently. And I want to show you, especially in the pollution, and this map was put together by the Pollution Control Agency for the Eco Experience this past summer, and it shows where small particulate pollution is higher, so the darker the color, the higher the pollution. As you can see, it really travels along all the roads where we get a lot of truck traffic and car traffic, and it really shows how, and then spreads in the areas nearby, so you can really see that it is affecting our air quality quite significantly. And so the more that we can reduce that kind of pollution using electric vehicles and other forms of not polluting vehicles, better off that we'll be. The second set of implications for sustainable operations are about heavier precipitation events, which are causing multiple things, both flooding and water pollution, and the property damage that results from it. So it's the inconvenience of the flooding too, and being able to get around, and the pollution it causes. So to protect against that in the city operations, there are opportunities really in public buildings, new and retrofit, to elevate and waterproof equipment and electrical connections to make sure that they'll operate if there's flooding, and that the damage will be minimized. To identify the areas in the city that are most vulnerable to flooding and really work on the infrastructure there to really try and improve it so that that doesn't happen. And then even the better idea, the no regrets strategy, is to really turn any city public properties, streets, parks, the building, the grounds, everywhere, you can turn into infiltration features with green infrastructure and some changes to the gray infrastructure, and you really create amenities. You can create parks where when there's flooding, they're designed so that they can really hold the water, but in the rest of the time they can be these beautiful areas, natural areas that people can go and have trails and walk around. There's just so many opportunities. In Normal, Illinois, they actually took their public square and put out permeable pavement over all of it with pavers and everything else, and then they built a water feature there and planted all kinds of trees with tree trenches so they could really retain the water. And so they have this beautiful whole public circle in the middle of their town, and an architect friend of mine was there when they had a really heavy precipitation event, just happened to be there, and he said that was the only part of the city that didn't have standing water for at least a little while. It worked really beautifully, and it's just a great gathering spot, and the trees have grown really big and shady. It's just lovely. So, and then again, another opportunity to provide incentives for businesses to be able to implement these same kinds of things. Whether it's flood proofing or solar and storage, permeable pavement, all kinds of things that private buildings can have as part of their design as well. And then it is really important to make sure that the infrastructure is prepared against really flash flooding to fix areas so that they're not going to have this kind of devastation that we saw in Duluth in 2012. So since we don't live on bluffs in Shoreview, you probably aren't going to get that kind of damage, but there certainly is plenty of damage when there's severe flooding. So the third kind of set of implications is having to do with more winter freeze-thaw cycles that we talked about. And not only do those cause damage on their own from, as you see, cracked pavements and all kinds of other things, but they also result in more chloride pollution from road salt in all the waters. And we're discovering more and more how chloride pollution, so road salt pollution, is really pernicious because it doesn't ever go away. There is no way to clean it out short of creating a desalinization plant. And so, and even if it doesn't run off directly into the waterways, it kind of accumulates in things and eventually makes its way there. So it's really important to have a lot of training about how to apply it to absolutely minimize the amounts that are needed and make sure that it's not getting wasted. And the more that you can replace the roads and sidewalks and stuff with permeable pavement, then you don't even need the road salt, because the permeable pavement, along with the kind of the sun and stuff, it just sort of soaks in enough. It keeps it warm enough that you really don't get the kind of ice accumulations that you do with other kind of pavements. Especially from melt, it will kind of be right below the surface instead of right on the surface, so you don't get nearly as much. So it just would really, it helps reduce the amount that needs to be used quite significantly. Planting more trees is good for just about everything. There is to do with climate change, but trees are also vulnerable from climate change, so it's really important to try and find resilient species and combat things that are causing the trees to die. And again, another opportunity for residents and businesses to be incentivized to do the same thing. So I just wanted to show you the heat island maps from the Twin Cities, how even though you're up north and away from the really intense heat, you still can see that up in this area that there is urban heat island effect. And so it's really good to try and minimize that. There are ways to do that. Because urban heat island both exacerbates the pollution that's created for more heat and the die-offs of the trees, and just if we have extreme heat events, it makes them even hotter both during the day and at night. So everything that we can do to kind of prepare for that for the future will be great. And colored and vegetative roofs, again, permeable pavements, multiple benefits, trees and plant cover. And then also finding ways, but for the city, to reduce waste heat through combined heat and power, so you don't have, or you're not just throwing away the heat that you're getting from some electricity production, and then having more electric vehicles and more electrical vehicle stations. So that's what I have to offer. It's sort of a cursory look at what the city can do. I'm sure there are many more ideas, and hopefully you'll come up with some of them. And this is how you would reach me.
All right, so really quickly before we move on to the next piece, let's give our three speakers a quick round of applause and thank them for coming up. And I do know that we have a slot on the time or on the agenda for a brief Q&A. I think we can still go ahead and get a couple of questions if people have a couple. Otherwise, we're going to save a good chunk of time to move into the conversation where we really get a chance to hear from you about the things that are of greatest concern for you. So, yes.
I'm curious about why salting roads is inevitable. I'm a retired civil engineer. In the 1920s, St. Paul didn't even plow its streets. In the 1930s, they started plowing streets. In the 1940s, they plowed a few more. We used sand in the 1950s, and we started using salt in the 1960s. And the water quality's gone downhill ever since. Why are we doing this at all?
So just to briefly restate the question, why are we road salting and applying chloride to our surfaces in the first place? And I think it's rather kind of hilarious that you're asking this while there's a water resource person at the microphone. So this, a lot of this is really looking at this idea of the expectations and this idea that, if it's snowing, we can still drive speed limits and we can still get to where we want to go on time, as well as looking at slips and falls and the idea that even if it's snowing, we can still safely walk in parking lots and on sidewalks. And so a lot of what is driving the continued use of salt application is often the expectations. That said, you're right. We used to not do any of the plowing, we used to plow, maybe not even plow. My brother lived in Anchorage for 8 years, and he would show me pictures of what his street would look like by mid-November, when it would be completely packed down. And that was just how it worked for the winter, and that was fine. But they also had a different idea of what was required for that. But one of the things that we're seeing is liability, and the fear of being sued is often what kind of forces the issue, as well as this balance of how do we keep people safe while also protecting our water resources. And so that's a conversation that's been going back and forth a lot. I'm going to try and be brief because we have an entire road salt symposium that Freshwater Society's been doing for years and years and years. We keep talking about it, so apparently there's still more to talk about. So to do justice now, I won't go into too much detail, but there is a limited liability law that has been passed in New Hampshire that has changed completely salt application practices, because now people who are applying those best practices using the appropriate amount of salt are protected to an extent from the fear of being sued. So I will spend a lot more time talking about that if I let myself. I'm going to stop now. So, are there any other?
The bottom line is then we're destroying the environment for convenience.
Yep.
Okay.
For many things.
So that's definitely part of it. So I'm more than happy to continue that conversation offline. Yes.
It was mentioned that natural gas is preferable to coal and so on, but I've read that it's not. If one looks at the entire life cycle of sourcing the natural gas, releasing it, transporting it, and so on, and a lot of methane is released. Could you address that?
So the question was looking at the life cycle of energy sources. I cannot address that. I'll pass it over to one of my colleagues at the table here.
Yep. Yeah, the extraction of natural gas does release methane to the level that I do think it actually surpassed coal a couple of years ago. I mean, really the bottom line is if we're going to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, if we're going to try to curb emissions so that we don't go over 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees Celsius, all the fossil fuels have to be off the table. And we have to start thinking about different, more innovative strategies. Electricity is kind of the easy one. Excel is doing a ton of things to decarbonize its contribution to the grid. Natural gas is going to be harder right now. It's efficiency, but there are strategies with fuel switching, with efficiency, with combined heat and power, which is where you capture kind of the waste heat off of different processing and utilize that heat. There's district heating facilities. St. Paul burns biomass and then sends hot steam through, or is it water? Is it hot water? Hot water, anyway, hot heat through its system for buildings as well. And so we have existing technologies to reduce the amount of natural gas that we do use. We have to look at using them more and think about that. Because natural gas right now, it's cheap. It's the cheapest way to heat your home. And burning the natural gas itself is much lower than burning coal. And maybe the silver lining in methane is that it lasts in the atmosphere much less time than carbon dioxide does.
So to kind of follow on his comment, we're sacrificing the environment for cheaper energy.
Yes.
Will the advent of driverless cars give us the opportunity to reduce the number of vehicles out there and maybe reclaim some of what is now road and maybe convert it into walkable spaces or sittable spaces? And I don't know, if we end up maybe perhaps with more sidewalks, it would give many of us an opportunity to do the kind of walking we no longer can do, especially if our days are going to be very hot and maybe our evenings will be cool enough for us to be able to walk. We might prefer to walk in the evening, but it's dangerous to walk in many of our neighborhoods. Mine, I would never walk at night unless I had 1,000 flashlights going around. Would driverless cars give us that opportunity?
So again, mostly for the recording, the question is how are driverless cars going to impact how we get around, the number of vehicles that are out there, the way that we use our road space, or how we think about walkable communities and the different benefits and changes that could have for our lives. Is that a fair capture? Okay. Any of you want to take it? I can take it too. I can begin.
I guess my answer to that, also I really like this group. My answer to that question is it's going to come down to how they're regulated. If we do autonomous vehicles where it's car sharing, there's opportunity to reduce the vehicle miles traveled. If everybody owns autonomous vehicles in the same way that everybody owns their own cars, it's probably not. And Met Council you want to talk about Met Council? Did a study where they actually see autonomous vehicles potentially increasing in the vehicle miles traveled because people who maybe don't drive now would start getting into cars. Right.
Right, so one of the other pieces that goes with that is land use implications. One of the pieces that they're looking at is if there is a car sharing economy that comes out of this and everyone's not owning their own car, that there's less cars that need to be parked in locations, and cars are going to be moving around and going and picking up different people, dropping them off in different locations, and there's going to be less time that that car is sitting still. I know often I'm biking for work, or whether it's to work or to get around to meetings, and this car that I pay my car payments on and have car insurance for and all those other pieces, it sits quietly in my garage. And that's something that the driverless cars could change. It also changes the dynamics of trying to transport kids to get to soccer games and things along those lines. And so it can reduce the total number of vehicles, but there's that piece on the total number of vehicles or miles driven. But with that, there is a whole suite of planning that is looking exactly at the question of the land use implications. What happens to the parking lots? What happens to roads when you no longer need to have all that on-street parking for the cars to stop at? Looking at parking ramps and saying that they should have flat surfaces instead of the arched, so that they can be repurposed into residences or office buildings after that, instead of having to do a full tear down and rebuild. So again, that's another topic that of course we could talk about all evening. And with that, what I'm loving about the direction that these questions are going is we're already going directly into the next set of conversations, which is these ideas and thinking about what this means for Shoreview, what this means for you and your lives, and trying to think through what might be possible and what the opportunities are here as you're thinking about Shoreview 2040. Which on that note, I was doing the math, and I will be 53 in 2040, and I was thinking about that and just trying to think about what the world looks like at that point, and trying to envision what 30 days over 100 degrees in the middle of the summer means at 53, or 60 days over 90 degrees, and just trying to think through what these hazards actually mean when I think about Shoreview 2040. So with that, I know our speakers are definitely available for further questions later, but I am going to have us move into our next piece. So I really don't do well standing behind a podium, so I'm moving. All right, you've got me. I've got a mobile one now. Then you had one more slide that I wanted to go back to, which one are you? Yeah. All right, so before we jump into this next piece, I did want to have us just look back at this slide where we're talking about the different things that make up what resilience is. Because again, when you're doing resilience planning, what you're really doing is managing for risk. So risk is made up, it's a function of the hazards, the exposure, and the vulnerabilities or the community features, as you see here on the slide. So our goal, we're going to go through that resilience planning activity that Leslie mentioned earlier in a bit of an abbreviated form, and this is where you guys get to participate. In a few minutes, I'm going to stop talking, and the rest of the evening is yours. I will ask a series of questions that help us get into identifying all these different pieces. You'll be keeping track of all the notes. If there is something that you think is important to make sure it gets into whatever notes come out of this, you are the only note takers in the room. So the ground rules for this is everyone participates. That means everyone talks, everyone listens, and most importantly, everyone writes their comments or ideas down. I'll tell you where you can write those when we get to that point. Each of these different pieces, we will be keeping track of everything. The questions build on top of each other, so it may feel like we're a little bit further away from where you want to be in the conversation, but humor us and work with us as we go through one by one. It'll all make sense as we go through to the end. Anything else you want me to say? Sound good? All right. So with that, looks like we've got good group sizes. Feel free to move to another table if you would like to. We do want no more than 6 people at each table. That's why you only got 6 chairs. And as we go through, the first thing that I want you to do is everyone hold up that hack sheet that you wrote stuff down on earlier. So I want to make sure you all have it. Fantastic. If you, we're not going to be guessing them, no worries. What I'm going to want you guys to do is actually first start off by just sharing what it is that you wrote down at the table with you. And of course, we heard a lot in these 3 presentations that may have sparked new ideas or new things that you want to talk about that you didn't write down, and that's perfectly fine.
And in fact, a lot of these conversations end up being kind of overwhelming and depressing when we talk about the changes that we're expecting. This conversation is different. This conversation is about what we can do, what levers we can pull, and the things that we can do to make sure that Shoreview in 2040 and beyond is a place that not only can handle the hazards we're dealing with, but respond to and thrive regardless. So, it's a hopeful conversation, and I will mention hope at least one more time before the evening is out. With that, if you don't know the people at your table, please introduce yourself as you're going around and then share what it is that you've written down for your answer to those 2 questions. As you're talking, pay attention to the themes. Look for the hazards that you have in common that are of greatest concern as you're going around the table. We'll give you about 10 minutes for this piece, and then I will call your attention back to the front. Go ahead. All right. It sounds like it's getting quiet. So we're going to do now, I'm curious to see how it is that each of the tables are similar or different. So I don't want you to explain what you've written down unless I'm really confused, and then I'll ask you to explain what you've written down. But just go around the room, and if one person from each table can just tell me what it is that you wrote down for the hazards.
Flash flooding.
We've got increased rainfall, warmer lows, and general temperature concerns, and then the migration of growing zones and pests. I mean, when it comes down, and it just depends on the level that it is.
All right, we can go to the table in the back. Just read out the blue sheets.
So we had both flooding events, and loss of pollinators. And also what we're concerned about is the future of our children and their children. So what the stresses that are added on to future generations.
Right. Okay, this table up here?
I don't know if we did this right.
That's okay.
I think our main thing was surface water quality and our concerns with respect to surface water quality, high water levels, flooding, excessive algae growth, impact of temperature on the lake environments. Other things we had down, traffic, less snow, diverse population, aging population, wildlife, and that's about it.
Okay, great. Table back here, the hazards or impacts that you're most concerned about?
We had flooding and high water level, decrease in insects, especially bees and butterflies, tree mortality, and then excessive use of salt.
All right, this group up here.
Well, we kind of had 3 different ideas, so I'll let everybody report, but my issue was overpopulation and the demands that those people make. But you can't do things if you haven't got space to do it.
Okay.
And I can see climate disaster causing people to migrate here at a rate that we just won't be able to. Mega rain events, of course, where the electrical grid collapse. What are the potentials for, say, a mega rain event? We get 10 or 20 inches of rain right out of the metro area. Would put the whole grid down. And then sabotage. People will morph from just shooting 100 or 200 people with a gun and say, wouldn't it be cool to just knock out the grid?
Okay.
Inadequate water management. There are a lot of lakes in this city, and a lot of water storage ponds and things like that. They need to be cleaned out. Water levels need to be managed. If they're going to be moving, if you control them, you can hold water so it's not such a big deal of flooding. But if you let it infiltrate too fast, you have a problem too.
Right. Okay, and our last group, the hazards or impacts that you are most concerned about.
Salt, flooding, and invasive species.
All right. So by and large, even though you guys are at different tables and you each wrote down something different to start with, there's still a lot of overlap for what we're seeing come out of here. There's a shared idea of what the future could look like and that we want to try and prepare for. So in this next question, what I want you to do is, and I need to get sticky notes around. Can I have you guys help me out? Can you pass out these purple sticky notes to each table? All right. What I'm going to have you do now is thinking about the things in your community that you care about. The things in your community that you care about.
One
One to each table.
One each table, yeah. What is it that concerns you? What are the impacts that you are concerned are going to happen? And so for some of your tables, you already talked about this to some extent, but I want you to think about what is it that's at risk of damage? The things in your community that you care about that are at risk of damage from climate impacts. And I want you to literally just make a list of them with one idea per sticky note. And this is going to be important. One idea per sticky note. So we'll give you about 7 minutes for this conversation. These are a little bit abbreviated because we are a little bit behind on time. But what are the things in your community that you think are at risk of being damaged? 7 minutes, go. All right, so my colleagues just passed around a new color of Post-its, and you're going to keep getting new colors of Post-it. This is going to be very much not white and drab by the end of this evening. What I want you to do now is, in your groups again, put them into categories. You've got a bunch of different purple sheets. I see a bunch of them popping up all over the place. I want you to figure out how they fit together. You can identify what those categories are, or what those themes are, how many you want, how few you want. This is where we start to take these individual pieces of information and turn it into something that we can tell a story with. So you'll have about 5 minutes here to put these into categories. Please write them on the new color of Post-it that just showed up. All right. So a couple of you have asked me where this is all going. So what I want to do is show you where this is all going. So each of these questions I mentioned are building off of each other, and as I show you this, my colleagues are going to pass around our next color. The idea is we're going to get to a point like this, where you've got the hazards that you've identified. You've got the things that are being exposed to the climate hazards that are going to potentially be damaged. Then, this is where you're going next, we're going into the vulnerabilities. What is it about the things that you've identified that increases the likelihood of damage based on a climate hazard? What's going to potentially make the damage worse or increase the likelihood that they'll be damaged? What are the vulnerabilities? And then lastly, and please don't give up hope, because I promise this is optimistic table in the back. We're going to then, after we've identified the vulnerabilities, move directly into identifying the community actions, the strategies that we can take to minimize those vulnerabilities or build on the strengths in our community to make it so that we have a better chance of being resilient in a changing climate. So this is where we're going. Feel free to rearrange your Post-its to mimic this if you want. It makes sense to me, it may not make sense to you, but we're going to go ahead and move on to the next piece. So you should have just received a stack of light blue or light green Post-its. On those, and again, one idea per Post-it, looking at the things that you've identified in your 3 different categories, what is it that increases the likelihood of damage? What makes those different things vulnerable to climate change impacts? And this is hard. And feel free to ask us over if you have questions, but this is the hardest part of what we're doing tonight. But you guys got it, I know you can do this. I'll give you about 10 minutes on this one, so go ahead and get started, and we will talk to you again then. So it looks like folks are kind of moving away from their blue sheets. This is the easy part of the evening, but before we get into it, I'm just curious if we can get maybe a couple of examples from folks around the table for maybe one of the vulnerabilities that you identified that sparked the most conversation at your table. So you just raise your hand and shout it out. We don't have to go table to table this time. Yes?
Political gridlock.
Political gridlock. I think I heard that at like 3 tables. Who else had that at their table? Yep. Anybody else have one that kind of sparked the most conversation at your table? Or that you just found to be super interesting? We can come back.
I have another one. Basically, the infrastructure is too small. We designed it for 100-year return periods, and 100-year return periods are too small now.
So design standards of the systems that we have in place. Anybody else have something along those lines? Yep. So again, even though we're having conversations at separate tables, we're starting to see a lot of the same stuff come forward, and that's the whole point of this process. Now we are approaching our final question. So the idea behind this piece was, and it did feel, a couple of you were like, really? We just talked about that. And I was like, yeah, but I want you to write it down. The reason why is because now all those different blue sheets that you've identified, what we want you to do is identify a couple of actions or strategies that you could apply to address those vulnerabilities. I'm going to pass these over to Leslie so she can pass them around. You can just do the pale ones. Another new color. It's how we keep track of what answers go to which question. It all makes sense on the backside, I promise. So again, and it works best to have it kind of linearly laid out at this point. That can be the easiest way to kind of organize what you've got written down. But again, looking at those blue or green sheets, depending on which table you're at. What's the flip side? What are the actions that we can take to address these vulnerabilities? And so I'll give you 6 minutes for this, and then we'll do a final report out, and then we'll call it for the evening. Go ahead. All right, so I gave you a little bit more than 30 seconds, and I see a couple of groups saying, oh no, we need more blue so we can write down another yellow because we have another idea. But this is going to keep happening. Once you've started this process and started these conversations and you get to this point, everything else kind of follows too. So it can be really hard to shut this off, and I apologize that for time's sake, because we will end on time, we're going to cut this off right now. Before I pass it back over to Kathleen to close this out, I do want to just have a couple of ideas of what it is that you wrote down on the yellow sheets of paper at your table. What are the strategies or actions that your groups identified? And if we can have 1 or 2 from each table, and we'll just go around, and then we'll wrap up. So whichever table wants to go first, I don't have to call on you this time.
Promote plant biodiversity and plant the plants so that they don't die off. Bare root trees rather than container grown.
Perfect. Do we have another idea at another table? You each get to go.
Strengthen political will for less money for defense and more for local infrastructure.
So now we've got this piece on politics and infrastructure. We've got plants and biodiversity. And I've seen a couple of nodding heads where it sounds like this was also talked about, the different tables. How about one of the tables? Go ahead.
PACE financing.
PACE financing. All right. Do you want to say anything else about that?
In a nutshell, it's like the equivalent of when we buy our homes, we don't have to put in the sewer and water lines and everything else. It's in there. It's part of the whole cost. But when you do energy efficiency improvements, like you did solar, geothermal, those types of things, the owner ends up paying for it, and then may or may not get that recovered when they sell it. And so the idea of PACE financing is it basically makes it like curb and gutter type stuff, where it becomes part of, it's property assessed clean energy, and so the taxing authority actually, you pay for it over 20 years, and it stays with the property. So when it's sold, whoever buys it continues the payment.
Perfect. And I know I saw financing at a couple of other tables too for another way to rethink this. How about this table up here? Oh no, you already went. No, you didn't. Go.
Just
I guess
one of the
I'll
yellows.
go with what I've got here. It's current infrastructure is designed with a 100-year return period. One thing you can do would be to maximize infiltration zones, so you don't have to necessarily rebuild the sewer.
All right, so now we've got finances, we've got helping to get more water to soak into the ground, we've got plants and biodiversity, we've got politics. Oh my gosh, you guys are a fruitful group. How about the table back here?
It's more politics.
More politics.
So coordination of policies with other cities and other levels of government, ideally.
All right, so now we've got some coordination and some integration of how we're governing, okay? And last but not least, all right, they say you guys got everything that they had already written down. So this is case in point. Again, we were at separate tables, but we've already got this idea of what it is that we can do to try and transform our community so that we can become a resilient community. And as we look at 2040, we have an idea of what that can look like. With that, we are done, and I'm going to pass it over to Kathleen to close us out.
Thank you. So what are we going to do with this information? So from here, actually, information from this conversation will be distributed to our committees and commissions. We are actually currently working on the Natural Resource and Resiliency chapter, so this is good timing, and we'll certainly incorporate this into the chapter. And when the draft is complete, and actually when all of our draft chapters are complete, we will be posting those online. And so keep looking at our website, which is destination.shoreviewmn.gov for those chapters, and you will have an opportunity to comment on those chapters once those are posted online, and then your comments will actually become part of the formal process as we move forward. So just to recap, I guess, where we're at, this is our last community conversation, so I thank everyone for participating in these. Certainly, your input is greatly appreciated, and like I said, I know I've learned something at all of these conversations, and I can tell you from working with our advisory groups, they are listening because they do bring up things that they've learned at these conversations as well. We hope to have the draft plan complete in April 2018, and then we will start an informal public review process in May through June, where we will have some open houses with residents and submit our plan to the adjacent communities for comment. Those open houses, that'll be more traditional, but again, we will be doing stuff online as well, so certainly look online at our website. We need to have the draft plan complete by November of 2018, because that's when we have to have a formal public hearing on the plan, and the Planning Commission will review the plan and then make a recommendation to the City Council, and the City Council needs to take action in December of 2018. So we have about a year left to complete the plan. So we certainly want you to stay involved. Again, the way to do that is just to keep an eye on our website, destination.shoreviewmn.gov. We've had all of these conversations videotaped, and so they are being posted online. So if you really want to watch them all again, feel free to do so. We also have animated videos that address certain topics in the plan, and they just give you like a really quick 1-minute overview of the topic. And then there are surveys that accompany some of the topics that we've talked about at our community conversations and that are also addressed in the videos. And then again, we go ahead, take those surveys. Everything that we get from our online feedback is being presented to our commissions and committees to review as they work on these draft plan chapters. And when we have these chapters done, again, we will be posting those online, and you will have the opportunity to comment on those as well. So thank you again for attending. I'm really happy that we've held these. I think this has been a good way to get other people involved in our planning process. So if you do have any questions, feel free to contact myself or the other staff that's here tonight. And thank you to our speakers.